Hi, I'm Lisa Singer. I am the Senior Director Event Programming at MediaPost. And this is Brand Insider BTS, where I get to pull back the curtain on some of the most influential women brand marketers today. And with me is Esther Mireya Tejeda. She is the CMO at Anywhere Real Estate. Hey, EM, as you like to be called as well. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you for having me on today, Lisa. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, no, I am too. I mean, as I always ask for people to recommend, people who they're really want to hear more about or respect or just are impressed with, and you came in strong, as a referral. So I'm really glad that we're able to make this happen, and to actually meet you right now for the first time. So it's awesome.
Wonderful. I'm excited. I'm excited you got good referrals.
Yeah, and I also do my snooping, which you'll find out as we move along. But
Mm.
I know that you were recently, when speaking of my snooping, you went to Marketing Society's Change Makers Illuminate conference. So you talked about change making to be critical to the future of success. So I wanted to find out from you in terms of and for yourself personally, how you've evolved over the years. Has there been a particular time in your life where that's been that moment of change?
Oh, absolutely. So I've been in the business of marketing for over 2 decades. In that time, so much has changed in the way that this discipline operates and what it means to be a marketer as the world around us has also changed. Consumer behaviors have changed. Digital disruption has really impacted every single part of our life, and now really almost everything that we do in some way, shape, or form is based in on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so there's a very clear inflection point in my career dating back to 2014 when I joined Univision to start up their Marcoms function for Univision Deportes. Now, Univision Deportes was something that was new, that was being launched at the time ahead of the 2014 FIFA World Cup, which Univision happened to have the rights for the first time in a while. And we're in a neck to neck competition with English language media providers like ESPN to really win at the ratings and the audience game for the World Cup, which is a huge global event. And so I was brought in to do two things: to really establish the narrative and to build out the Marcoms function for Univision Deportes during the World Cup, which was a very transformative business initiative for the entire company. And also to work really closely with other leaders and other functions as the company was thinking about its future plans by way of an IPO or a sale or otherwise. So that was really my first foray into transformation,
Mm-hmm.
doing the work of business transformation end to end. And I had been doing transformation work ever since then, past Univision at what was then Entercom and then became Entercom CBS Radio, which is now Odyssey. Did the same at Sound Exchange. And now I'm doing also a transformational effort at Anywhere Real Estate. So that was the beginning of all of that.
Well, and talk about that, like not even that specific, but just being able to make that transformation. I'm sure when it first came about, maybe there's that, tentative, like, maybe how do I do this? Can I do, like, when in any type of thing, whether it be your career, life, whatever it may be, when you're faced with that moment of, okay, do I stay with the status quo or do I change? Do I move forward that way? And obviously that's exciting and that brings you to other opportunities, but it's also for some people not easy to take on that new challenge. How do you brace yourself to do that?
Well, I think first of all, as a marketer, change is part of the nature of this business. If you are not really flexible and able to adapt to dynamic environments, then you cannot possibly succeed at being a really strong marketer. This entire business is reflective of and reactive to the way that people are behaving and the way that consumers are experiencing the world around us. Marketing is, I like to say, often human psychology applied in a business setting.
Mm-hmm.
And human psychology and human behavior is not a fixed thing. So the business of change and the business of transformation is the business of marketing.
Yeah.
That is the thing that we must do, and we must be able to do. So I've come into this work and into this discipline being open to change and transformation, and really leaning into transformation strategy and driving business reimagination, whether that's an IPO or a rebrand or a diversification effort. Because again, it is a very natural output of the thing that we do every day as marketers.
So you knew what you were getting into, obviously, when you chose it. But I want to actually back up in terms of when you were deciding what you were getting into, when you're graduating, and or even you're coming to the end of your senior year or whatever it may be, and determining what did you envision for your life, and talk about
None of
that.
this, Lisa. Yeah. None of this at all.
Okay, so how did it go wrong?
So I will tell you, I had every absolute intention of being a lawyer. I went through the entire process when I was in undergrad, going through the law school application process and the LSATs and the whole nine yards. And I decided to defer for a year in order to get a sense of what the business world was like, having been just continuously in an academic environment ever since childhood. I wanted to take that break.
Yep.
And so I ended up taking a role on Wall Street as an analyst at S&P. So I went into the financial services industry. And what I learned in that role was how much I absolutely hated that really white shoe, very traditional corporate environment. And it was more a lesson in learning all the things I did not want to do than learning what I did want to do. And I have to tell you a quick story. There was this moment where I was, on the train. I lived in Brooklyn at the time. I got a little studio apartment. My office was in Wall Street. This was like, early 2000s. I'm taking the train in the morning. It was like 8:00 in the morning because it was kind of like a butts and seats culture. 8:30 a.m. Everyone was in the office. And I'm wearing a button-down shirt and trousers with sensible pumps because that was what was appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I had this moment on the A train where I thought, I'm wearing a costume. I feel like I'm wearing a costume. Like I'm living somebody else's life. I'm wearing their clothes. I'm going to their job, and I have to act like this other person for at least 8 hours, closer to 10, before I can go home and really be the person that I really am. And there was this magical moment on this train at, early in the morning on that one day to work where I realized I cannot do this. This cannot be what the culture of my life looks like. And so I started to do other things on the side. I've always been a very creative person. I've always been a writer. I've always also been very social, really enjoyed events and parties, started hosting parties for my friends. Wow. At different clubs around New York City, and sort of became like a part-time club promoter. And in the process of throwing all these parties and hosting all of these friends every single weekend at different places throughout the city, weekend, weeknights, the whole nine yards, it dawned on me that this could be a business, right? Like I could be in the business of this instead of in the business of financial services and ratings and doing financial analytics. And so that ended up being a transitional period where I left that job. I did not go to law school, and I ended up moving into a role in advertising at Ogilvy, and completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I'm so thankful for that because I had this opportunity to really experience what a different kind of life could look like that was just much more aligned with the person that I am, how I think about the world and how my brain works, right? And the connection between the left and the right side of my brain really came to life when I stepped into the world of advertising, marketing, experiential communications, brand, and all of the things that I do and I have been doing now for a couple of decades.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, one, it's great that you were that much self-aware of yourself at such a young age. A lot of times when you're just starting out, you realize, well, it's maybe not me, but I got to pay the dues in order to get to where it is, or, and so just the fact that you had that realization, but that you then went and said, okay, now I'm going to do this. Although you got to think about it. If you think about the skill sets, wanting to be a lawyer, a lot of the things that probably drove you to, or, pulled you towards that direction, researching, telling stories, you know what I mean? Like convincing people of something, all of that are skill sets for a good marketer. It's just you were going into the wrong, environment, I guess, but you then had to figure out where you would be best fit.
That's right. That's right. And the client relations of it all is what was always very attractive to me about being a lawyer, like having that synergistic relationship with your client, getting into their mindset and their psychology to get the best results, which, by the way, as I said earlier, is exactly what we're doing as marketers, except it's not one client, it's cohorts of consumers across, whatever your customer base looks like. So it is that at a larger scale.
Right. It's understanding them. And so you've worked on both, as you talked about, the agency side, and now here you are on the brand side. Talk about like someone who's starting out or maybe changing their career, but they want to be you. They want to be the CMO of a corporation or a smaller company, bigger company, whatever it may be, but they want to get to that kind of position. What's the best advice? Like, what's the path that you would recommend that gives them the best chance of actually achieving that?
Well, I think thinking about failure as part of the natural progress towards learning and growing is the most important thing in this business. Again, none of this is static. I mean, the role of a marketer today and the role of a marketer 20 years ago is extremely different as more science has come into it, more data and analytics have come into the business. It used to be more art than science. I'd like to say we're kind of swinging the pendulum a little bit more in the other direction. It's more science than art, although it's very much still a blend. The role, the function, the discipline is evolving. People are evolving. So as part of that growth journey, it's the risk taking and the being able and willing to know that it's not always all going to work out beautifully, and that there is a tremendous value in the things that actually don't work out, because you learn what not to do for the next round. And just to tie that back to even the personal story that I shared at the very beginning,
learned what not.
I learned what I didn't want in that very first role. And by taking that as a lesson, I really was able to pivot, the rest of my life. And that happens in micro moments all of the time throughout your career, especially if you're in this discipline. So that would be my advice.
Well, and I do think, I mean, it's about how you react to failure. Like, you're not that it was a failure, say, but you being in that outfit and being on the subway was a failure for what your life should be about. And instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to deal with it, or I'm just going to run, you found that opportunity and you learned from it. And so I think that can be applied in every sense of the way, just like you talked about, as you have failures, whether it be in your career choices or in your professional choice in terms of campaigns or whatever it may be. It's about pivoting. I think that's a word that you need to be very ready to do in a position like yourself.
Absolutely. And I like to encourage everyone that has ever worked with me or for me to use what I call flexible thinking. There is obviously always the easy charted path forward, and then there's all the other ways that still get you to the same place that may require a step to the right or step to the left, maybe a little bit diagonal, but the destination is always, the eye on the prize, and the final destination is always the same place. Mm-hmm. And that kind of flexible thinking and being able to move back, to move forward, take a step to the right, and maybe a step back to be able to take 5 steps forward. That's all part of the journey. It's also really importantly part of being a really good marketer and trying to understand what's going to stick.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm curious. So when you were taking some of those zigs and zags and maybe diagonals, was there a time when you just sort of hit a wall, or maybe hit a point where, oh my gosh, this is just unsurmountable, that, like I cannot get through this, but then you did? Like, was there that time? And if so, how did you get through it?
I think that's such an interesting question. I think everything, especially in transformation, initially feels insurmountable when you're just confronted with what the business is trying to accomplish, right? Like right now, even at Anywhere, we are in the process of pretty significant transformation stemming from a rebrand last year. We used to be called Realogy, we're now Anywhere. We are stewards of some of the most recognized brands in real estate, including Sotheby's International and Coldwell Banker and Century 21, ERA, Better Homes and Gardens, Corcoran. We have also title. We're in the title business and insurance business and the mortgage business and Relo. And so we are in the middle of really changing the direction of residential real estate as an industry and thinking really differently about how that transaction process can be more simple, more efficient, and honestly more transparent for the average buyer or seller across the country. And so when you just initially step into that role and you just take stock of what a massive change it is that we're trying to make, it could potentially feel insurmountable. But the trick is, and sort of the thing that I've learned having done, more than a handful of these kinds of transformations at large, really matrixed, multi-brand corporations like this, is that the way to think about this is in bits and pieces. You're not doing the entire transformation in one fell swoop. You're creating a journey, and you're going to be on this journey for whatever amount of time makes sense for your business. And there's going to be phases and milestones associated with that journey. And you're now taking on much more manageable pieces. But again, the important thing is eye on the prize. And so that way of ingesting and synthesizing pretty complicated, large-scale transformation initiatives and missions is the way that I've been able to approach the work and delegate, assign resources, and sort of chart our path forward as a leader of people and a leader of teams. It is also the way that I approach major change or obstacles that happen in my personal life. So there's just a ton of fluidity between what we do on the clock and what we do off the clock in terms of personal skill sets, perspective, and just ways of thinking about problem solving and tackling challenges.
Well, I think what was the key thing that you said, or for me, I would think, is you make them smaller first. Like, you keep your eye on the prize, but bring it down to manageable steps instead of, because if you look at something as the whole, like, oh my gosh, this big obstacle, it's very self-defeating, I would think. So
yeah. And we're all talking a lot about, yeah, no, it is. And we're all talking a lot about the agile method. Everyone wants to be agile in the way that they operate their business, their team, their transformation strategy, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of truth in that, like the ability to have the agility to move in and out, have a plan, redirect, pivot, optimize as you learn more about the transformation because you're going through it. So with new information or new step in the milestone, you have actually an opportunity to recalibrate your plan and see if what you thought you were going to do as phase 2 or phase 3 makes sense still, given what you know now that you perhaps didn't know when you started the transformation journey and you were on step 1. So again, lots of flexibility, lots of fluidity, keeping your eye on the bigger picture, but really focusing on the immediate sprints that will eventually create the marathon.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the recalibrating, as you said, I think that's, because it is like, even just when you started doing, parties, at clubs, and that helped you to go to the next. If you didn't have that step, then you wouldn't have gone to the next step at the agency and that kind of thing. So I think that really makes sense. And it brings it to a more manageable opportunity for people. I'm curious, what do people get wrong about you when they first meet you? Is there something that they, maybe they assume about you and find out later that's not quite the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lisa, I'm a born and bred Manhattanite New Yorker, born in the Bronx, actually raised in Manhattan. I have a very direct way about me. Very no nonsense. I like to say straight with no chaser is what you see is what you get. And that is just the constitution of like who I am. I'm also, quite honest, which comes along with the directness and the no nonsense piece. And I like to think of myself as very fair and therefore very balanced. And so what I have learned in my career is that all of those attributes, when they are associated with a man, land in a very positive way, typically in the corporate environment. But when they are associated with a woman, suddenly they become problematic attributes, right? You start to hear things like, she is intimidating, for example. And so I think that is the perception that I often have to overcome, that people who don't know me very well do get very, very wrong. And it's something that we need to fix as a business culture, as corporate culture, and I think just as society at large, because it is a very unfair disadvantage to women, particularly strong women and women in leadership roles. What I will say, though, is that how I use my sense of strength and directness and no nonsense and honesty and fairness is to champion and empower the people that are on my team or that I work with. Because I just strongly believe that if you're doing great work, you should be acknowledged for that great work. And if I can be a voice of that just balanced, objective truth, then that is exactly what I aim to be, and the kind of mentor, leader, partner, colleague, and friend that I aspire to be every single day. And that is the output of all of the adjectives that I gave you at the top of this question that sometimes get lost in translation when you're just looking at this through the very stereotypical lens that business still operates, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, and I think what you said is very valid in the sense that if it's a man who has those attributes, it's perceived as strong or a positive thing, whereas a woman can get a bad reputation because of it, or a more negative reputation. When you've dealt with that, how did you handle it? Because things have to change, and the way it's going to change are more women like yourself in these positions where people can see that happening, and someone like yourself paying it forward, bringing your team members up and giving them that opportunity. So that's the ways to kind of make it, future-proof it. But when you've dealt with it moving forward, how did you deal with it at the time? Did you ignore it? Did you get defensive about it? Like, did you try to prove them wrong? Like, what was your way of being able to then work with people and continue moving forward without having to make yourself smaller?
I don't believe in making myself smaller. I don't believe that anyone should be making themselves smaller. And I advocate largely and loudly for that not to be the case. I think the way that I have handled this is to build really strong relationships across organizations that I work with, and especially in my team. There's nothing that can speak louder for you than other people who work with you or for you, championing on your behalf, or having a good impression of being on your team or being part of your mission and your work streams. And so that is what I do. I consider myself a people first leader, which again is actually really closely related to the themes that I mentioned earlier, the fairness and the objectivity and the honesty. And I like to put people first. And so taking that approach and leaning into those characteristics and behaviors and mindset has really helped to navigate really troubled waters in corporate culture as that culture continues to evolve. And we all do the incredible work in DEI to make sure these are not challenges that the next generation of women leaders face, which is entirely what I hope for.
Yeah, well, and I actually want to ask you, we just had an event last week for TV and video. And we had a presentation on multicultural advertising, and really having to reach all different audiences, and really not trying to just make it one size fits all. How important is it for brand? Not just that you're leaving money on the table, because you are, if you're not reaching all the different audiences, but also, just as you said, you want to see not only DEI within the organization who you're hiring, but you want to be representative of that as a brand, with your advertising, with whatever, however you're putting out to the world. but where do you draw the line? How important is for a brand to do that and make sure that they do it authentically and that really reaches the audience in the way that they want to be reached?
It's business critical. I mean, and I have to be honest, every time this question comes up or this conversation comes up and it's framed in the lens of DEI, it's surprising to me because this is really not about DEI. This is about knowing your customer. And that's the number one thing of all businesses, whether your customer is a business or you have consumers, you have to know who they are, how they operate, and what they expect and want, and what value they want to extract from you and your offering in order to have a successful business. That is a fundamental. And so really what we're asking here is, how well do you know your customers? What do your customers look like? And what do your customers want? And as America and the globe continues to become even more multicultural, diverse, and we see really just globalization happening at larger scales and a faster rate than any other decade, in recent history. Knowing your customer means you have to be able to super serve everyone that is in your base. And 9 times out of 10, your base is going to be very, very diverse. And so for me, this is actually a business question that has to do with, are you properly segmenting your consumers? Are you properly investing in consumer insights to understand who is in your portfolio of consumers that you should be talking to, targeting, and thinking about? And if you are not doing that, and you are not then going out to super serve those segments, then 1, you are leaving a lot of money on the table. And 2, you're also killing your growth strategy, because we also know by demographics that most of the growth, certainly in the United States, is coming from multicultural markets, Latino markets, Asian markets, and AFAM, LGBTQ, women, et cetera. I mean, that is what America is going to continue to look more and more like in coming generations. So you need to get ahead of that from a business perspective. The DEI thing, I think, is almost a separate conversation. Inclusive marketing is smart marketing, and it's marketing that's based on insights, strategy, and appropriately segmented consumers that take into account everybody that is a potential part of the addressable market. DEI, however, is about, for me, is about creating inclusivity in your culture, in the culture of your business, in the values of your business, in the principles of your business, and in the way that the business operates as a workforce and the kind of workforce that you are trying to build, which I think is a related but markedly different side of the issue. And we need to treat them and think about them as 2, again, separate but related things.
Yeah. And I do agree that they of course are separate. But to make, and this I want to ask you, to make you able to do it successfully, reach the multicultural audience, reach the Asian market, reach the Latinos, doesn't it make sense, even business-wise, if not just really, it does make sense, just, morality or whatever, however you want to term it, but business sense, you're going to be able to reach them better if you have people who are Asian in your audience, younger.
Absolutely.
If you can't look at it as a way to be fair, look at it as a good business sense.
Exactly. So we don't even have to have the conversation about whether it's fair or not, because that's a subjective conversation, unfortunately. But let's just have a conversation about practicality, right? If you have a diverse customer base and it is imperative to you to grow your business and super serve your customer, and you've done the insight work, and you know that your customer base is diverse, and you've done the segmentation work, and you know who these people are, the variety of people that are in your portfolio, you must be marketing to each of them the way that they want to be marketed to, in order to reach your targets, in order to grow your business, and in order to hit your revenue numbers and your numbers in general. So it absolutely makes sense. And to me, it is a 100% business imperative to have people that represent the communities that you serve sitting on your marketing teams, especially sitting on your creative teams, and on your strategy teams. I'll tell you a really interesting story that I heard at the ANAs that happened just last week, the Masters of Marketing Conference in, I believe it was Orlando. Mark Pritchard from Procter & Gamble was on a stage, and he mentioned that in skincare, P&G had really been leading with fine lines and wrinkles for mature skin, right? That was the messaging around most of their skin products and skincare products, fine lines and wrinkles, which I could have told him, and I'm sure anyone in the AFAM community could have told him, is not actually the main priority for women of color, right? The main priority for women of color who are aging is hyperpigmentation, brown spots, melasma, maintaining luminosity in your skin, dullness, etc. It's not fine lines and wrinkles. That's something that generally we're not concerned with until much later on in our aging trajectory. And so by focusing on fine lines and wrinkles, not having the right research in place on skincare, they were missing out and basically not really engaging or speaking to large segments of the skincare buying population because they just weren't asking the right questions and doing the right insights. And I can also tell you that if there had been an AFAM or a Latina woman sitting in those strategy meetings talking about the skincare marketing, go-to-market messaging or the positioning, et cetera, who had agency and a seat at the table, they probably would have made different choices because these are insights that would have come up at the very beginning of the innovation, ideation, and creative process, right? And so he shares this story, which I think is fascinating because it has happened across so many industries and in so many different brands. And that is the value of having people who represent the communities that you're trying to serve sitting on your teams and having agency, having a seat at the table, and being in positions where they can raise their hands and say, this does not make sense. This is not going to address, this particular market or otherwise. The amount of money that is left on the table when that does not happen is staggering. And we see it over and over again across industries, across brands. What happens when that's not part of the workforce dynamic and when that is not part of the business model? And so we don't even have to talk about fairness, although that's a separate and very valuable conversation. But if we don't want to talk about fairness and we don't want to couch this as an HR issue, we want to just look at it from the numbers perspective. The numbers tell a story all on their own, a very compelling story, actually, all on their own.
Right. Well, and I think, because I do think you can get into a lot of different opinions, a lot of different arguments, everyone has their own viewpoints, and that can open up a whole can of worms to bring it in that way. But everyone wants to make the bottom line. Everyone thinks about the bottom line. Everyone wants business to grow. So
that's the one thing we can all, as business people, that's the one thing that is objective that we can all agree on.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I want to end it with one fun little question. What are you most obsessed with right now? Your guilty pleasure?
Oh, God. So I have always been obsessed with shoes and bags. I'm an avid collector of vintage bags. And now I have added interior design. I'm a lover of beautiful things. I think that's the art side of, my marketing brain. Beautiful things that are just nice to look at and add just beauty to the environment, to your personal environment. And so now suddenly I have moved beyond like personal items like shoes and bags and jewelry into home. So I am like obsessively following interior decorators on Instagram, and I am like all over the Pinterest boards, and I'm reading. I'm not a designer by any stretch of the imagination, but you would never know it if you were just to take a look at my algorithm. It's just it's all this content around home decor because it's my new guilty pleasure.
That's awesome. Well, I want to back up to the bags. What's your most pride? The one bag that you're just like, we're so happy about?
Oh, well, I have got my hands on a 1979 Chanel classic flap with the lambskin leather and the 24 karat plated hardware that
Wow.
is pristine condition. It is not something I ever wear. I never take it out of the box. It's a piece of art. So I collect it as such, but it is so beautiful to look at. I mean, the simplicity of it, but yet the functionality of it, but yet the beauty of it, and then the story, and then the story of Coco Chanel.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it together, it's just really sings to my creative heart. And that's my absolute favorite. It's the most simple and yet my most favorite bag in my collection.
That's awesome. I was like in my head, I'm like, I know it's going to be a Chanel bag. I didn't know which bag, what, but like, I know it's going to be a Chanel bag. All right, this is the advice part. Someone who wants to get bags like that, or, like, where do they go? What site? Where's the go-to where you can get something that's a little bit more in the price range of, the majority?
So interestingly, I source a lot of my vintage designer, like collectors items from Japan. So Japan has a huge luxury market and huge resale vintage market as a result. And so it is, I mean, if you get in the know with like really great curators and people who are resellers, who have consignment shops, et cetera, in Japan, and you build those relationships, you can really find some just amazing stuff. And I now have a daughter. So the way I make this make sense from a business perspective is this is an investment that I will be leaving to her as, when I pass on, and she's going to inherit all of this art. And that's what makes me feel, like I am, actually contributing in some way. And I'm not just doing it for the beauty, but I am really just doing it for the beauty. It speaks to my heart. But that would be my advice.
And you have to admit, the bag, I mean, if you're talking about, especially women, for women, the bag is the status symbol. You know what I mean? You can get by with whatever clothes. I mean, obviously you dress nice and whatever, but people want to look at
isn't that, speaking of marketing, right? Isn't that the amazing power of brand?
Yeah. No.
That you would have that perception, like the bag is what's going to make my entire outfit. I mean, that is a feat from a marketing perspective, to have position that entire industry, that entire line of accessories in that way. And I would venture to say, if you were to poll most American women, they would have that exact same opinion. And that's from a business perspective, that's a huge accomplishment, because we all think that. We've all learned to think that the bag makes the outfit.
I agree. Well, Ian, thank you so much. And I love that advice, because I'm actually in the market. I'm trying to find like that bag that I want, but I want to actually use it, not for the collectible. So I'm looking at, okay, how high do I want to go? Does it make sense? Because I leave my bags everywhere. Well,
we can talk offline. I'm happy to share some of my key findings and insights. I've been on this journey for a long time.
Yes, I appreciate the advice. So Ian, thank you so much. You were awesome. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you.
And thank you for watching. As I always say, and that's how I got EM. If you have a wonderful woman you'd want to hear more about, you're impressed with, marketing, brand marketer, please let me know. I will do my best to find out more about them and hopefully get an interview. So thank you for watching. And EM, thank you again.